joined by Amit Serper, who is currently at Sternum, right? That's where it is, right?
Yeah.
Amit?
Yeah.
And it was really awesome that we got to work together for 4 years, 5 years.
For something like that. I want to say 4. Yeah, 4.
I think we started in 2016, and then you left in 2021.
Yeah,
so
January,
5 years,
like right at the beginning of 2021. Yeah.
Right, and you always brought a certain flair to research and a good perspective to stuff, and it was always fun to work with you. And I can still see the guitar in your background, and I've just been dying to catch up with you. But
I almost feel like we should start on music this time instead of starting on cybersecurity. We almost always end on music.
Oh, okay.
Every episode,
it's like music or gaming or something like that. We end on. Let's start there this time. So,
guys, you drive. Just
okay. So before we do that, before we can talk about music, we have to mention the fact that you're a new father. That's happened.
Yeah.
So, what's that like? And then we can talk about how that's affected music, because of course, babies and music are really important, etc.
So I became a dad in October of 2021. So it's been a while.
But, it has, yeah. So I'm a shameful friend. I haven't spoken to you in a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surviving. I'm thriving. It's been great. It was I became a dad when I was almost 35. So I waited, because I was having a good time, speaking in conferences, traveling, meeting people, doing stuff.
Doing
and then COVID happened. And then COVID
I was 39 when I became a dad, so I can relate, man.
Oh, yeah.
I'm an old bastard. Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually, we were like cooped up at the house for so long, and we watched everything from The Sopranos to Twin Peaks to 11th season of Real Housewives of New Jersey. Like we
ran out of other things to do.
Yeah,
guess I'll be a dad now. I've done everything else.
Yeah, I think it's time.
That's awesome.
And it's been great. She's awesome. She speaks. She's starting to talk. She speaks 3 different languages. It's awesome.
So Hebrew, English. What's the third one?
And Portuguese. So our nanny. Right now, she's with a nanny, and our nanny is Brazilian, so she speaks Portuguese to her.
Oh, she can be better than my sales team at Brazilian deals. Then can I hire
her? The only thing is that she needs to be changed a few times a day.
So do salespeople, by the way. My own sales team right now is either laughing or going to kill me. But,
should we bleep that part out, Sam?
No, keep it. It's real, right? And it's spectacular.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I imagine in my head that you started playing music to her when she was very young, because I know that was always a big part of your life. And our friend Elliot and you used to jam all the time around the office, or at least at home when you were working together. Yeah.
So I think that more than I'm a researcher, I'm a musician. Although I haven't been active in the past 7 to 8 months.
Active as a musician, you mean?
Yeah. I was in a band, and we released an album, and I quit on a few months ago. I left the band just for differences, and
it sounds like a Beatles thing, man. Like differences.
Which Beatle are you?
Don't want to know. There was no Yoko involved, but
I was about to say, yeah. I mean, you're right.
Bad vibes. Yeah. With music is, at least for me, it's very. As a matter of fact, it's like that with everything I do. If you remember, like when we were working together, I used to get very animated when stupid
passionate.
Passionate. Okay, let's settle on passionate.
Yep.
I used to get very passionate when
you would turn up at my desk and be like, "How can we be doing this? How can we not be doing that?" Yeah.
Remember desks? Remember like an office? I haven't been to an office in like 3 years. Oh
my god! Yeah.
And just like with the way I treat my work, I treat music and what I do and what I create with a lot of seriousness. And there were some bad vibes, and I just decided that I need to get out of that situation. So I left that band, but the album is on Spotify.
Nice. What's it called? So we can put links to it and stuff.
The band name is Ben Moses, BenMoses. And I used to play drums there. So
you're primarily a drummer, right? That's you.
Yeah. I started playing the drums, I think, when I was 13, and I'm 36 now, so you do the math.
Did you start doing technology, security, hacking first before drums, or drums first? Which one have you been doing long?
I think that like I had a computer since I was 5, but I think that like programming and like trying to understand how things work, I think I started it around that age, actually 13, 14.
So around the same.
So around that age. Wow, never actually thought of it. Yeah.
So as soon as you actually contrasted music and research, and back in 2017, I was in Tel Aviv. You were in Tel Aviv, and you did that crazy thing with NotPetya. Is your approach to music similar to your approach to research, or are they completely unrelated in your mind?
It's a really good question. So just like with computers, and I think anything else that I do, I never really had formal training. So I like music. I had 5 drumming lessons in my entire life, and when I was actually after I started playing. So I got a drum set from a family friend who stopped playing and gave me his drum set. And
your parents must have been thrilled about that.
They didn't like your parents, right? That's
yeah, they hated your parents.
They didn't like your parents. They gave you a drum set.
No, my parents actually really supported it. That was really cool. And I lived I was fortunate to live in a big house that had a separate basement. So I was just in the basement. Like, I think that the neighbors suffered more than my parents, if I'm being honest.
The neighbors paid for you to go away or to go anywhere, actually.
That's why he lives in the United States
all
now.
Of the neighbors, all of them were terrible. So I think that it was a win-win situation for everyone in my household. So I started playing the drums, and then I took a few lessons, and then I went I just wanted a guy to teach me like how to read notes, and then I just got books, and I listened to music, and I learned on my own. So when people ask me like, who was your drum teacher? I'm like, oh, it was Ian Pace from Deep Purple and Taylor Hawkins from Foo Fighters. And I would listen to the song in the headphones and I would play along with it.
So rock is your thing. Like rock is your genre.
Yeah.
What's your you can kind of see by the posters behind you a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, rock is the main thing, but I listen to pretty much everything other than country music, if I'm being honest. I love
gotta hate on something. Yep.
Yeah. I love jazz.
What about folk?
Blues.
Where's the line for you? It's like folk and Americana. Is that to country?
It really depends. I don't know. Like, some things just don't, like, when I listen to like some, if it's like too twangy and too like complainy and stuff, I can't.
So if it's backed my truck over the dog, my wife left me, like that, that's too far into country.
Not a fan of that.
Yeah.
But I don't listen to a lot of like newer music. I think I was like left, like my mind was left in the 90s in the grunge era.
Nice.
Sorry. And like that's my jam, and that's what I listen to mostly. But I love music. It's my like number one love in life, and I think that computers and security and all of that comes to a very close second. But unfortunately, what pays the bills is not music.
Is that a bass guitar behind you, or is it a guitar?
That is a bass guitar.
I thought it was. It looked like from the strings. It looked like
Jaguar bass.
So, do you play the bass as well?
Yeah, so I started playing the bass a few years after I started playing the drums when I was in high school. Also, I taught myself. And then I also I had a guitar. Like, I played the guitar too, but the guitar that I had fell and broke, so I don't have it anymore.
R.I.P.
I need to buy a new one, yeah. So I'm...
Do you gravitate to music that is the foundational stuff? Do you like, because drums is often... the band plays around the drums and the bass is often the beat, or am I reading too much into that?
No, you're right. And I think that I love being in those areas. Like, I love, again, I'm a drummer first, and I love being in the place where, I like to keep things simple in the drums. I'm not one of those people that like go all out and,
not a Neil Peart.
No, not
Neil
really.
Peart fan.
But,
is that possible? You don't tell me no.
What?
You don't like Neil Peart? Oh my god!
Oh, I love Rush and Neil Peart, of course. By the way, it's Peart. pronounced Peart.
You're correct. You're correct. I say Peart because
we have a
most people
Canadian
here
on
say
the
Peart. I'm a
phone,
Canadian.
and
right?
someone who knows music well
Yeah,
enough
yeah.
to know the pronunciation, and then me
Yeah.
making up as I go.
So I love Rush. It's just that my style is I like to keep things simple, and I don't want people to know that
2112 is just too much. Is that?
Yeah, it's a really good song. No, but when I play, I like to keep it simple, and I don't like to go. By the way, one of the reasons why I left the band is the guy wanted me to be like more, do more crazy stuff. And I'm like, why? Why do we need to do that? I mean, I can do it. It's not a problem. It's just like we don't.
What's the point?
Yeah. I mean, keep it simple. No one needs to know that like the drums are not the main thing here. And so I love being in that place where I'm in the back holding everyone, whether it's on the bass or the drums, just like tying everyone together. I think that's a really good spot for me, and I enjoy that in music. When I play guitar, I'm not a solo guy. I don't have the ability to play like guitar solos. It's just like
nice. Well, what always amazed me with Rush is it's 3 people. Like it blows my mind.
Yeah, and Geddy Lee, the singer and bass player, also like there are songs and shows where he stands next to a keyboard and plays the keyboard with one hand, and his bass just like taps the frets in another hand and sings. It's just an insane amount of talent.
Yeah. By the way, I know you have a flight coming up, so if your daughter lets you, there's a book by Chuck Klosterman called The 90s, and like I lived through the 90s and I read it and it tied so much together for me. So, hey, if you're looking for something to read on the plane, on the Kindle
great.
or
I'll check it out.
It's a good one. Yeah.
It's
super cool because it ties all the, I guess we'd say memes today, but everything that happened in the 90s sort of gets tied together. And I'm struggling to find something you didn't include. Yeah.
Oh, great. I'll check it out. I was actually looking for something. Thanks.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about music and security in this case, and it goes back to what you said about teaching yourself in the security information space. Everyone debates what the term hacker is, right? And so there's my definition, and I think there's CNN's definition, which are completely two sides of the spectrum. That there's somewhere in between. But my definition has always been it's someone who can like look at a system and wants to know how that system works, disassemble that system, and sometimes create functionality for themselves. 100%. It's like exploitation of a system. A hacker hacking a system is saying, I'm going to figure out how this works and make it do something different, right? But for both music and security, it sounds like what drives you in a lot of those is focusing on that, seeing what is this pattern, listening to the music, and then reverse engineering that to create your own unique take on it. And same thing with security is that's what you do as your job. You're
so spot on. It's exactly what I think, and there's a lot of instances where I would listen to music and I would listen, like there's an album that I listen to. I mean, if that would, I listened to it since I'm in high school. It's a totally underrated album. Nobody likes that album but me, I think. It's
I'll share it. What is it?
Bruce Dickinson. That is so he's Iron Maiden's legendary singer. So in the 90s, he actually left Iron Maiden and went on a solo career. And he released a few albums. And that was in the 90s, like my favorite era in rock music. And Bruce Dickinson is British. And I just finished reading his autobiography.
And you are part British, as I recall, too.
Yeah.
As am I, technically, yeah.
Yes.
Part. Yeah.
Bruce Dickinson released a few albums that kind of sounded like Iron Maiden, and then the grunge music was exploding in America and in Seattle, and slowly making its way through Europe. And Dickinson said, I want to make something that sounds like kind of grungy, and he actually hired an American producer from Seattle. The name escapes me right now. And they made an album, and he actually took his touring band, and he wanted to say, you know what? I don't want to be called Bruce Dickinson anymore. I want to have a band, and I want to call the band Skunkworks, and I want to create an album. So he actually made that album, and his record label said, if we're going to release it as Skunkworks, no one's going to know who it is, and no one's going to buy the album. So might as well call it Bruce Dickinson, and then call the album Skunkworks. So they actually made this album, and I honestly think it's one of the best rock albums that I've ever heard. And that album failed epically.
Oh.
It failed epically to the point where, like, there were almost no live shows. The songs are not like, no one knows them. And I love this album to the point, I don't know if you can see it, but I actually have it here.
Oh yeah, in the poster,
wow.
or in the frame rather.
Yeah, there in the frame with a vinyl record. So I love this album, and what I started to say is I listened to this album, I don't know, thousands of times. And every time I listen to it, I'm focusing on something else. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, that bass part here is so good. It really makes the song. And oh my God, the drums here. And there were a trio. It was just three of them. The guitar is so good in this part. And I'm sitting and analyzing it in my head and listening to it 100 times. And that's how I'm listening to music. I don't just like put a song on and just let it play. I really focus on the parts, and wow, they did this is so cool, and the bass and the guitar playing in unison, or he's it's an octave higher of what the singer, like I'm like really getting lost in it. And sometimes I ramble about it, and like I tell my wife about it, and she's like, she doesn't care.
So years ago, Amit, I had this absolutely nutty teacher. I think one of my degrees was in lit, and he challenged me. He said, "Hey Sam, what is an aesthetic experience, and why can everybody have it? Like, why is it universal? Like when you have that ah moment." And when I say he was nutty, he used to like shake and get angry in class at people's papers and stuff. And he was one of those super fun teachers that really inspires you, but also terrifies you secretly. And his theory, I'll shorten it, was that there's these elements that make up any art. So like in lit, there's things like setting and characters and themes and stuff like that. But when they're all super well done and they're all really well integrated, where you intellectually get it and then it blends and it becomes transparent, and then you perceive something bigger and then you have an emotional reaction to it, you get that aha moment. And you can get it with any art form. But you've got to invest yourself in it to understand each of the parts.
I really agree. It's such a cool observation, because it's that's how I feel about art that I enjoy. If it's film, or if it's music, or if it's photography, or if it's well written exploits.
Yeah, definitely.
I really like no joke. That's how I feel.
It's elegant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I think that it's such a cool way of
it's the wow moment
expression.
So you're sitting there and you're like piecing it together, and then there comes a point where you just go harmony, like, and you bliss out. Yeah. So you get that from that album more than anything else for music.
Yeah, like. You said harmony, but I mean, like, my favorite thing.
Maybe not harmony or melody or whatever, but
I just say it's like my favorite thing in music. Like when I used to write arrangements for bands I play with, because I've been playing in bands for 20 years. Just like, again, I made albums. They're on Spotify. Harmonies was like my thing, and I got that also from another a band from the 90s, Alice in Chains. They're Unplugged, MTV Unplugged. Legendary. And like their thing was harmonizing vocals, and like that's also something that like I took with me, because in almost any album I recorded, I'm doing like harmonized vocals and like backing vocals in the background. Like that's my thing. And again, music is just like the finest form of art, in my opinion, because you have 3, 4, 5 more people like working together, making something together, and everyone plays on their own, but when they're combined together, it's just like mind-blowing. I could go on for hours.
You should. I mean, you should.
No, you absolutely should. I mean, so the most recent Nobel Prize in physics was about how the universe is not local or real, and there's a point that I'm saying this. It's that waves and that harmonics are actually kind of important. So there's something to the universe that we are actually all about waves. And I'm saying that not facetiously. Like, there's some beauty in that, and there's some beauty in the music. So it actually really super matters.
So you're saying science backs the hippies now?
Yeah, man, it totally does. And the grunge.
Music is math. Music is math, and music is something very tangible. I mean, how if you play a major chord on the guitar, your brain hears that and says, "Oh, that's a happy song." when you play a minor chord, oh, that sounds kind of sad, right? But it's just a sound. It's just a bunch of frequencies. It's just a bunch of waves traveling through the air and hitting your eardrum. But your brain.
We actually hear work. No, we actually communicate emotions through those. It is very clear.
But it's a shared experience too. Like the major minor example.
I often wonder what would an alien hear and take emotionally from music that we play, right? And what would they bring?
Depends if it's a country song or not, I think.
Yeah, no, so,
you said something.
Or folk.
I like folk music. I'm going to go.
No, I like it too.
And we love you. And we love you for it.
Countries where I go.
Sure, you do.
You be you. Yeah.
There's something you said a few minutes ago.
There's going to be hate comments to this one, aren't there?
Hey,
that's
saying,
okay. That's fine.
That is my personal subjective opinion.
By the way, do you think that's because where you grew up, it wasn't really a thing? Because where I grew up, it wasn't either, really.
Country music? Well, I didn't grow up in the States. I moved.
That's why I'm saying that, yeah.
I moved to the States 7 years ago, but, I'm from Israel. Israel is very influenced by the U.S.
But not so much by the country music cultural element?
I actually think that,
Sure, we tried. CIA tried. Country discs and blue jeans.
We shipped a lot of good country stars to Israel and when they went down.
Yeah, the country music, the way it sounds in America didn't really make it to Israel, but everything else did.
But there is Israel. There's a lot of folk music that exists.
Yes.
In the culture.
Yes.
In both Jewish and Israeli culture, or the one and the same sometimes.
Absolutely. If any of you do you know who Mark Lanigan is, or was rather? He passed away. So Mark Lanigan, one of his best songs, he actually completely ripped it off from an old Israeli folk song.
Oh.
Don't Forget Me is the name of Mark Lanigan's song, and he if you'll Google it, he said it himself, to the point where he used to play in Israel a lot. I actually saw him. I saw him twice. One was in Israel. One was in Boston. And in the time that I saw him in Israel, he played that song, Don't Forget Me, and the audience joined in by singing the original lyrics in Hebrew to that song.
That's cool,
right? So. Those things happen, but it's a matter of personal preference. Country music is not my thing, and
that's all right.
That's all right. Yeah.
I think many people share the sentiment. It's
funny because for me, country music wasn't really a thing, but there's some. My wife really likes it, and so I hear more of it. And some that I started to like, and older country music was a thing where I grew up, because I grew up in Canada for the most part. And so suddenly out of the blue, an old country song will come on and I'll really like it. My wife's like, what's wrong with you? This is like my parents' generation. And I'm like, yeah, sorry.
Maybe you're like me. You're an old soul.
I'm an old soul. That's what it is. I'm actually old, by the way. That's the other thing. Like, it catches up with you. But,
you look good. You look good for your age.
Thanks, man.
Don't let anybody tell you else.
That's I'm going to take that one. Yep. Thank you. So back to cyber. So you have changed your career a couple of times, and you're doing IoT based research now, right? And how's that going?
Yeah. So I actually
or OT as well.
So before I joined Cybereason, which is where
you did some. I remember you also did some stuff around Mirai.
I actually did that. Yeah. I used to do. When I was still in Israel before joining Cybereason, I used to work for the government in Israel, and I did.
That's a surprise. I'm kidding.
I was there for like 9 years in total, and in the last 3 years, I really focused on what was then a brand new field of IoT exploitation, because we're talking about 2010, I want to say.
Yeah, so, yeah. Things were starting to get stacks, and there weren't as many devices around doing that. Things
just started becoming smart, and this whole trend just started. And I remember in 2011 I actually went to Black Hat and DEF CON for the first time from Israel, and that was a 20-hour trip just to get from Tel Aviv to Vegas. And I remember watching a talk by a dude called Zachary Cutlip, where he showed how he exploited his router. He had a router, and it's a really cool talk. It's on YouTube, obviously. And I saw it. I was like, oh my god, it's a little computer. I mean, it's like no shit. It's like it's a Linux computer, and like do things.
There's a real processing capability on that thing. Yeah,
and everyone has them, and it's crazy because if you find a popular enough device, and you have a way to run arbitrary code on it, you won. Like literally you won the internet. And a few years after, someone actually did that. And if you remember the Dyn DDoS, and I think it was 2017, someone actually did that. Like they created a botnet based on a bunch of, I don't know, like Roombas and routers, and they took down the entire
big chunk of the internet.
Yeah.
So when I saw that, it blew my mind because it's like, it's everyone at that time. Again, it's 2010. All the rage was Metasploit and exploiting Windows boxes and doing all of those things and Windows XP vulnerabilities and stuff. And like, that's cool. That's really interesting. That's awesome. And everybody does that. But if we're talking about, those tiny things that are in so many devices, and we can actually hack them and run code on them and exploit them and do something on them that where it's not supposed to do. And when you talk about exploiting regular machines or servers, you always say, "Oh, I have a firewall. I have back then there was no EDR. Like I have an AV. I have a firewall. I have an application firewall or whatever." But if you're talking about exploiting like the little router, that router is not behind the firewall. It's in front of it. It's the first thing that touches the internet. And all of the traffic that flows out of the network, right, through all of your fancy security appliances, ends up going through that router that you can exploit at that time very easily. And that like blew my mind. And I felt like this is a very, very big blind spot that people are not aware of, or the industry are not aware of. And it was perceived as junk hacking. Oh, look, I got a shell on a router. I got a shell on a... No, it's serious business. So I used to do that. It's a very... I took you on a trip for that.
No, it's good. So I remember 2010, everyone was talking about... You mentioned the word smart as well. And smart grid was happening here in the US. And the government pumped billions into trying to upgrade the grid to be, quote, smart. And so then I went on a tour of 6 different power companies, and I went to one. And what was happening at the time was the internal networks were like 3,000 or 4,000 people, but the external networks were like hundreds of thousands of systems. And I said, "So what are you guys doing for smart grid?" They're like, "Oh, we're rolling out all these devices to homes." And I said, "Okay, what are you rolling out?" And they said, "Oh, we got a bunch of Landis and Gear devices we're sending out." I said, "Oh, that's good, because they got like some neat things coming for security." They said, No, we're rolling them out today." And I said, "Wait, security stuff is coming in 6 months, but you're rolling them out today? Why?" They said, "Because there's $125 million available today to roll these devices out insecure. And if we wait for it, the money won't be there and we won't be able to roll them out. So we're going to roll them out now. And we'll just take the insecure devices." I said, "How many are rolling out?" They said, 500,000 to homes. And I was like, 500,000 known insecure devices is preferable to you to waiting and maybe rolling out 100,000 secure devices and then having to fund the rest. Yep.
You just remind me something, because all of those, like, let's just call it IoT, but all of those IoT projects, right? Smart meters, smart whatever, routers, whatever. All of those things, usually, there's very little thought in not only securing those devices, but in like, okay, how do we keep it secure? Right? You have to deploy. You have to update firmware. No, there's like, I'm telling you, it's like I did this thing and then left it for like 10 years doing other things in security. And then now that I'm back to it, I'm like, I'm sure that there's like plenty of advancements and plenty of new things. No, nothing. It's like, it's really bad. It's as bad as it was like 10 years ago. And And this is what, by the way, this is like what we're trying to make better at Sternum, like with our product.
Well, so you've always been a master at using Twitter, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because I think
I don't do that anymore.
But you used to, and this topic that you just mentioned, I have been so worried that companies are going to exist, especially startups, for like 3 or 4 years, and these devices will last for like 30. You said something recently, and I got all snide in a response and said, "Oh," because you said, "Hey, the company's not going to keep updating this," and I said, "Oh, typical companies or something." And then you actually wrote back and said, "No, they got the message." And
well, they said that they did. I haven't.
They haven't confirmed it, but that was that working? Like, did the snideness and you calling it out actually have an effect?
So here's what happened. Myself and my teammate from Sternum, Ruben, we were working on this device. I took off its front panel, but this is a smart electrical socket, right? You plug this to your power, and you plug in whatever you want here, and then you can like turn it off and turn it on from your phone or whatever.
Or from around the world.
That thing is a Linux computer. That thing actually. Here, that square board here is a Linux.
For our listeners only, our non-video participants, he's pointing to a board and.
I didn't know that there's audio only. Yeah,
He held up a plug.
I'm holding a plug with a small square with 2 boards on it. One of them is square and smaller, and this is actually a Linux computer.
And the small one is the computer. That's
yes. The big one is just a bunch of resistors and relays, and we started doing like a vulnerability research project on it. Within, I'm not kidding, minutes, we found a buffer overflow, and then worked on exploiting it. And in order to exploit it, we had to get the firmware. We didn't have the firmware, so I actually had to dump it straight from the chip, like fun stuff. But after we had everything ready, we wanted to disclose it to the vendor. So I went and I approached Belkin, who's the vendor, through their bug bounty partner, which is BugCrowd. And I disclosed the vulnerability and haven't heard anything back for weeks. And then back in January of this year, I was speaking at a conference in DC. I was speaking at ShmooCon, and I met Casey Ellis, who is the CTO and co-founder, I think, or founder or co-founder of BugCrowd. Like, we started talking, I was like, "Hey man, I disclosed something a few weeks ago. I haven't heard it back. I don't know, like, this is pretty bad. It's like code execution on the device." He's like, "Oh, tell me can you give me the submission ID?" I gave it to him, and like a day after, I get a response. They're like,
"That's good.
Yeah, we checked it with the vendor. They're saying that it's end of life, and they're not going to patch it." I'm like, "Oh, okay, interesting. End of life. I mean, I just got that device, and nothing said that it, like, nothing in the app on their website, nothing said that it's end of life. But now we have a critical vulnerability on it, and they're not going to patch it because it's end of life. Okay, no problem. I'll just go to MITRE. I'll disclose it to them. I'll get a CVE, and then everyone will know." And we did that. And I have to say, like, I told the marketing folks at Sternum, I was like, "Listen, it's not really interesting. It's not like it's a Wi-Fi smart plug. Like, who cares?" And like the exploitation itself, like simple stack buffer overflow, like nothing crazy. And the marketing, I was like, "No, this is like a lot of people have that device." And he actually went on Amazon and started reading reviews, and like he came up with like some way of knowing how popular this device is, and apparently it's pretty popular. So after we got the CVE and finished the disclosure process, obviously we released a research blog with all of the technical information, and that went very surprisingly, it went really wild, to the point where all of the subreddits that are talking about home automation, smart homes, appliances, whatever, like there were like a good 8 to 10 subreddits that were like obsessing over this issue and calling Belkin out, like saying, "I have like 6 of those things in my house, and I just bought them like 3 months ago. They're not, how can it be? How is it end of life? How didn't you tell us? And this is a critical vulnerability that exposes us, and you're telling us that you're not going to patch it? Like, what the hell?" So a day after, they actually reached out to The Verge, who were one of the first websites to cover the story. And they said, "Oh, okay, we're going to release a patch. Okay." And I was like, okay, cool. I mean, to my knowledge, they didn't release anything yet. Maybe I'm wrong. I stopped following it, if I'm being honest. But I haven't seen anything yet. But
That is something I think we collectively need to think about how survivability happens for some of this stuff, right? Like when somebody goes out of business, it's not like they can choose to keep sustaining it. So if you had a small, like...
So 2 points. I have 2 points.
Go for it.
That. So one is, this is exactly what we're trying to do at Sternum with our product. Because our entire approach to this issue is, listen, I'm not even talking about the IoT companies that like come and go, and there were instances. There's a company, maybe it was Wise, WYZE, maybe
that sounds right,
that they went out of business and came back, which was very weird. Like they basically said all of
drop liabilities and then return.
Right, all of your devices are now useless. Bye. And then like 2 months after or something, someone acquired them. I'm not sure if it's Wise, but it's one of those. Someone acquired them, like, hey, your devices are working again. Rad. So our approach to this problem of security, at least at Sternum, is, listen, we have a way, like a deterministic way of knowing when your device is being exploited as it happens. And like, it's no BS. It's working. It's working. There are demos. There are videos of me demoing it. You can see it. It's working. If someone is exploiting like a memory corruption vulnerability, command injection, whatever, like we can see it as it happens, and we can kill the exploitation process as it happens, and your device is secured, which basically makes the whole subject of applying security patches from the vendor redundant, because you have, I wouldn't say redundant, but it lowers...
You have a fallback.
Yeah, you have a fallback. It lowers the threshold of panic when something happens, because you know that if you have our product bundled into your firmware, you're secure, right? And for example, with that vulnerability we found with the stack buffer overflow, classic buffer overflow, easily, like that would have been easily prevented with our product. So that is our approach to that, right? Saying like, listen, patching IoT devices is kind of difficult. Maybe this is something you don't need to worry about. So this is one thing. Another thing about companies going out of business, I have, you just reminded me, I completely forgot about it. Right before I left Israel, so like 7 years ago, one of the, a CTO of, I think what at least then was the biggest ISP in Israel, reached out to me because we met back at the time I was working for the government, and he was like, listen, I have a problem and I think that you're the guy I need to talk to. I'm like, yo, what's up? And he's like, there's CPE, customer premises equipment, which is basically if you get a router from your ISP, that's called a CPE. So we have a bunch of CPEs that we've given out to customers, and and the company that makes those routers doesn't exist anymore. They went out of business, and the SSL certificate that is on the device, which authenticates to our backend systems, like that is going to expire in 4 months, and we're in a problem. So can you maybe help us find a way to exploit the device and push a new SSL certificate via an exploit? So I did this little project with them back then, right? Which was kind of crazy because you have to go through all of this like patch by pwn approach where, you know, like it's like they have a gun to their head, which is going to fire in 3 months when those SSL certificates are going to expire. Like, we have to take care of this now. It's either that or going to, I don't know how many people's homes and like replacing the equipment with something new and more expensive. So this problem in IoT is really bad because it's not only the consumer devices that are, you know, very unsecure and in bad shape. It's also the non-consumer market who suffers. And then you have those like weird situations where an ISP says, you know, I have this many boxes at customers that I'm in 3 months, I won't be able to control them. And the customers won't be able to connect to the internet. And like, what are we going to do? We got to find some creative way to handle this problem.
So I love the approach that Sternum is taking here. I also think that companies should be required to have strategies for those circumstances, like aftermarket services that can be sold or transitioned to someone. There's things in the insurance model. There's open source stuff that can be done. In other words, they have to at least be able to say, here's how support for these devices could survive, or when a root certificate becomes compromised, and we've seen CAs fall apart. right? So when that happens, it's chaos for a bunch of devices. And then suddenly people go, well, which ones are in business and which ones aren't? And imagine trying to answer the question of where that Belkin plug was in 10 years as opposed to now, right? Because I'm sure those things will be passed around and they'll be in boxes somewhere and they'll get plugged back in after 5 years and who knows, right?
Some facilities guy at a hospital decided he had 30 of them and it's the easiest way to get something connected so he can see that they're on.
And from the outside, I didn't see the front of it. From the outside, do you even know it's a smart device or at least a connected device?
From the outside, it's a plastic box.
Right.
Looks like a plug.
It looks like any other plug.
Yeah.
Yeah. That janitor in the hospital has no idea that it's different from other ones unless he actually takes a look at it and passes it over.
And those things really really irked me when I go back to 2011 to that DEF CON talk by Zach Cutlip. I think it was called From SQL Injections to MIPS Overflows, something like that, because the architecture of the router was MIPS.
MIPS overflows, my goodness, a million instructions per second.
And that takes me back to this, like when I realized, oh my God, this is like an actual computer. This is not because I was like, I don't know, hardware, that's magic. It's like a bunch of chips together. It's magic. This thing is magic. There's no code running on it, right? Or
engineering
if there is a code, it's like something real-timey, like super low level, like bare bones C code that just like moves things from register to register. But it's actually like running Linux. And when I saw that, and when you try to compare that situation, when you look at a device like this, and when you look at a computer, you go, okay, so if I bought, I have my computer that I bought here, like my desktop computer that is like 6 or 7 years old. I bought it when I moved to the US. It's still working. I have Windows on it. It's getting patches from Microsoft. Like it's working. It's not new, but it's working. It's working fine. It does the job for me. But when you look at those things, they push them out to the market. They issue 1, 2, 3 patches, and then they move on to the next thing. And
next product. End of life.
Right. And then it's end of life. But you can go on Showdown today and look for like an ancient. I kind of want to do it right now. Go on Showdown and look for like a very ancient version of a router that I had back when I was in high school. I'm just curious.
You remember the version?
You're going to find it.
Yeah, it's a Linksys. Let's see. Linksys, it was BFSR41. It was like a really old router running
What kind of memory do you have over there? Did you upgrade your brain?
My long-term memory is really good. It's the short-term.
Clearly.
I wonder why. Because we're in Massachusetts. I'm waiting for Showdown to. Oh my God! There's 152 of them.
Wow.
It's less than what I thought, but still, this is a device from more than 20 years ago, and there's 152 of them
that are easily discoverable in 3 seconds.
Yeah,
so there's probably another few hundred at least.
Yeah, and that thing is running a software stack from back when I was in high school. I have a daughter now, I'm 36 years old. So it's I think that it's just crazy that there is no legislation for it. There's no real standard for this thing, right? They're making these computers. These computers are everywhere, whether we know it or whether we don't. Microcontrollers, like those things are everywhere. And there is no standard. There is no rule. There is no common approach to how are we going to support and secure those things. And then we get to a point where someone's Roomba is causing the entire internet not to work on the East Coast. It's crazy.
So I have to tell you another story. So I mentor people in the state in Mass. One of them, shout out to him, his name's Ayapan Rajesh. And we were doing a boring project assessing like a town's response plan. And he said what he really wanted was a CVE number. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like second year CS and cyber student. And he loves cars. So we were talking and I said, hey, most products that go to market, like they don't make the components custom for every car that goes out. They reach up on the shelf and they take the operating system or the RTOS and they just shove it in there. And I said, my suspicion is that newer cars, they haven't gone and done all the back porting. Like they haven't gone back and said, okay, so the patch we did on the previous car, let's go and make sure we do it on the next car. And he went away on his own. And he went to a friend of his who had a newer car that had just come out. It was a Honda. And sure enough, a vulnerability from a Honda from like 3 years ago appeared in the new car because they hadn't done that. So he started to work on it, and he told them about it and stuff. He got a CVE number that summer, by the way. He presented a black hat, but accidentally it got out to the press that I had done it.
Oh, no.
Right? And yeah. So they called me, and I'm like, no, I didn't. Then they found out even better. A student had done it, and like Good Morning America called him to go on TV. Poor guy. So like, but now he's doing this like regularly. He just went to Black Hat MEA last year, but it's everywhere. And it's not just the old stuff. It's the old vulnerabilities turning up in the new stuff.
Yeah.
That's the worst.
Yeah, you look at all of those embedded, like you have some vulnerabilities in like embedded devices, like RTO systems, like Ripple 20 and all of those vulnerabilities. And that exists in everything, like cars, electric toothbrushes, like crazy stuff. And again, it's like that what blew my mind back then. It's like those little computers, they're everywhere. No one cares about them. It's like no one cares about it. Not the vendor, not the consumer. No one gives a shit.
Do you just off the top of my head? I just had this thought about that and the proliferation of them. So most devices that you buy for your home now, home appliances, have a Wi-Fi option, whether you use it or not. So that includes stoves, electric stoves, not necessarily gas. Some gas, I imagine, do. I don't know. I haven't looked it up. But electric stoves do have Wi-Fi connectivity. Microwaves, washing machines, etc. Do you think you can, with stoves specifically, if you have the right exploit, do you think you can cause fires?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Do you think there's
dryers too? A lot of dryers are actually natural gas.
I have a gas dryer, but I have a gas dryer from like the early 2000s. So there's no, like, it came with the house. There's no real smartness into it.
Because you could depending on how they implement it, if they have a very dumb.
I actually took it apart. There's nothing in it. There's nothing.
Well, mechanical fail-safes are still super important in those circumstances.
Right. So if you have a temperature measuring on an analog circuit that measures temperature and shuts the stove off if it increases temperature.
No matter what instructions.
But I wonder if there are ones that are just using the computer. It monitors the temperature because that was the cheapest way.
Well, it turns out a lot of our grid, despite the smartness, quote unquote, it still has those mechanical fail-safes. And there have been attacks on the smart grid, and a lot of them have failed to spread very far because of those mechanical fail-safes still.
We need to definitely push that, though.
I think that all of those, like, it doesn't need to be a dryer even. It could be something that you can actually control in some way, the electrical components that take the voltage from 120 and lower it to 12 volts or something. What if you can make that thing overheat or miscalculate something or not regulate the voltage properly? That will explode too. I mean, a temperature sensor, I happen to have one here. That's a temperature sensor. Like, there's nothing on it.
Right.
So there's no real lot like that. You're really relying on the skills of the programmers that are writing the firmware. And again, after doing it for
cheapest bidder,
it's magnificent, of course.
No, after doing it for so many years, to the point where I have a command injection tattooed on my arm. I always show this. After doing it for so many years, it's like, I mean, programmers use the C language as if it was a scripting language, and they call system a million times. I remember looking at a firmware of I was still at Cybereason back then, looking at a firmware of a Netgear router. It's somewhere archived on my Twitter profile, and there were like hundreds, like 400, 500 calls to system, which is like the worst thing you can do in like programming.
That's slow too. It's super inefficient from a coding perspective.
Stupid. There's no reason to do that. And it's like every one of those calls was vulnerable to a command injection. It's so dumb. Like, why would you do that? But again, people are doing that, and those things get shipped. It makes it into the CI. It gets compiled. It gets shipped, and companies are getting owned by that. There was again also when I was at Cybereason, we were involved in a incident response engagement where I was taking part in this one. And it was a company that did everything right. 2-factor and everything. And like everything was super secured and hardened. And like really, like it was the best it was the best knowledgeable CISO that I've ever spoken to at a client, like really doing things amazingly. But they got popped really bad by a nation state, and they stole like gigs of source code. And when we went and started looking at what happened, we saw that there was a connection to they were using SVN, not even Git, and they had a connection to their SVN repository from a badge reader in the building. So apparently that badge reader was connected to the same network, no segmentation,
Totally flat.
Yeah, and that badge reader was vulnerable to like a command injection or something really stupid. Attackers went and got a shell on that device, used it as sort of a proxy to get inside a network, and they were pwned. And that's it.
Did that badge reader, do you recall, did it have a public IP? Or did they do something else? They got in the network?
Remember. It's been a few years, but
that's remarkable.
Yeah, but I assume that it was accessible to the internet. I mean, how those things are, which is nuts. But
there's two things that just came to mind too, because we usually try to record an hour, and I think there's two things that would be really cool for our listeners that we typically don't do. One would be just walking through your workflow. Like, how do you work every day to find new exploits? I think
assuming there is a workflow, by the way. I mean,
assuming it's not just a crazy.
Well, I wake up.
You have
that's good. It's a start. Yeah. Noted.
What are the tools you use every day? What's your common workflow? We usually don't talk about that level of technical stuff, but this topic specifically around exploitation really, really interests our audience and others. And then, do you mind showing your desk? Like, what do you keep on that your hardware hacking desk? Like, what is your?
It's a bit. I have another camera there. I'm not sure it's going to work. I can try. Let's
just so people know what to hack, so to play country music for you.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Smart speakers. Do you have?
Riverside won't let me switch cameras, but I can try and show you what's there. As for the workflow. If I get a project, I actually have a project like this right now that it's on my desk here. If I get I have a product like I've never seen in my life, never touched it, no firmware, no nothing. First time that I'm seeing it. It's a smart home hub. So the story behind it is really cool. Like a journalist friend reached out to me. He was like, "Hey, I live in a managed apartment complex in New York." And they have noticed that they've notified us that they're replacing all of the locks in the building with smart locks. So right now they have a key, but they're not going to have a key anymore. They're going to have this lock, which is a Yale Z-Wave smart lock. I'm treating it very nicely, as you can see. And with that,
I know my lock picking skills are going to be useless. No.
And they're basically giving you a lock, and they're giving you a Z-Wave hub, and that Z-Wave hub is connected to the building, so the building can, manage your lock, but you can manage your lock too. It's like this whole thing. So this journalist was like, "No, I don't want this in my apartment. This is crazy." So he said, "No, I'm opting out. I want a key." And they said, "Okay, so can you?" Because they left all of those kits outside the tenants' doors because the day after, like, someone was supposed to come and install it. And he said, "Well, I don't want it." So they say, "Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. Can you give us back the box?" And he said, "Well, I don't. What box? I don't have the box." And the reason that he said, "I don't have the box," is that because he mailed me that box. and that's what you just saw. So I've been working on that hub for 3 weeks now, and it's actually a very well secured product. It's like one of the most secured embedded products that I've ever seen. Still, I have a root shell on it. It just took me 2 weeks instead of 10 minutes. And my approach is always my approach. I have a few approaches, actually. So the first approach, if it's a device that I've never seen, I'll plug it in, I'll configure it like a normal user, and I'll just try to use it. I'll just go, if it has like a web UI, I'll go to the web UI, and I'll just use it. I'll just see how things are working. And I'll try to, and I know it sounds kind of weird, but I swear that's how I think. I'll try to imagine, like, it sounds so stupid.
No, say it.
It sounds dumb, but I'm trying to imagine, like, okay, if I were the code, I swear, if I were the code, what would I do? Like,
how would you operate?
Yeah, like that. Like, I'm trying to, like, really I'm literally guessing. there's for example, a screen where you can configure the IP address of the device on your network, right? Like, okay, are they actually use, like, when you're going into the text box and writing the IP address, are they actually using the operating system's API in order to do that, or are they being lazy and calling system and, like, they're doing like system ifconfig blah 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 %s blah 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 blah, and usually that's what they do. So my first thing that I always do, and again, that's why I have it tattooed on my arm, is I type semicolon reboot in everything, and I hit submit. And if the device reboots, I know that I have code execution. In a lot of cases, it just works after like 5 minutes, like that, and that's how I exploit devices. If that doesn't work, then it means that we need to do some reverse engineering and to see how things really work and how the code works. If there is a firmware update available for the device online from the vendor, that's great. You can download the firmware update. If it's not encrypted, then extracting it usually isn't that difficult. If it is encrypted, you got to see how it's encrypted. Is the key available somewhere? Did someone write a decryptor for it before? If the firmware is encrypted, it's a bit more difficult. You either need to...
It's not trivial.
Yeah, you either need to work on decrypting it, or what... And that's what I did with the Wemo device, is I dumped the firmware straight from the flash. So I would...
Right, where it was already unencrypted
I will take the
and
device
expanded.
apart. I will find where the chip is that holds the firmware, and then I'll attach like a test clip or something to it, and I'll dump the firmware straight from it. Then when I have the firmware, I can actually start, like, I need to extract it. If it's a Linux device, you get like a Linux file system that you can actually start looking at the files. And then that's another thing, like what is running, what is not running, what is the program that, like, where's the web server, what other things are running. But again, this is like static analysis, because you have the image on your machine, it's not running. And you're sort of guessing. The next step, if there's no breakthrough, would be to either try to emulate the firmware on my computer, or, like, which is more difficult, like put the firmware in an emulator as if it was a VM, and try to get it to run. And then, because it's running on my machine, I can debug it. I can do all sorts of things to it. That's usually kind of a difficult task, because the kernel looks for a bunch of stuff that are available on the board of the device, and I don't know how to emulate them. Like, they're, it's trying to find like the LED blinky light or whatever, or the controller that makes the light go blinky, and I don't have a way to emulate it. So if that doesn't work, then the real fun starts, which is, and that's exactly what I did with this Smart Hub project, where I would try to get a shell on the device, because I have a physical access to it. So I'll take it apart. I'll look at the board. Usually you have like debugging headers on the board where you can, if you're lucky enough, you can get a shell, like a root shell straight by hooking 3 wires.
Right, through a serial
connection. Like a UART
Yeah.
interface, exactly. And if that's if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, there are protections on it, and then you have to bypass them. And then after all of this work, which I'm like really, compressing into a few sentences, you get a working shell on a working device, and then you can really see what's going on. And that's actually what happened to me with this hub, because it actually has, it's really interesting. I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen it before. It has an encrypted file system that is supposed to be very secured. It's loaded in a secure way. You have because if you boot the device, even if you escape the bootloader, you get a root shell, but on a system that has nothing on it. Like the entire point of that system is to boot the secure part of the product. So
does it have a bootloader that runs first, and then it loads the shell operating system, which then sideloads the main operating system?
It's a bootloader that runs first, and it loads a bunch of kernel drivers for like the encrypted file system and all of that. It'll then unmount everything it had mounted before. It will mount the encrypted file system, decrypt it, and then unload, or rather use in it to load a new kernel that has completely other things, and it loaded from the encrypted block that you have just mounted. And they've done that so that they'll have a more secure way of booting the device, so that you won't be able to plug into the UART headers and get a root shell where the secret sauce is.
I would call out too, real quick, for listeners who don't dabble really in the depths of how Linux and operating systems work, this is one of the core advantages to Linux that us really nerdy people love. You can do that type of thing, such as swap your kernel out hot. So like Windows or Mac even, typically you can't really swap out the parts that are interacting with the hardware and what you see the user interface. That's what the kernel's doing.
Yeah, it's really.
And
by the way, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the sequence you just said. So even if you're not looking to take control,
that's actually
mess
what
the
I
thing
created.
up.
So now I have a root shell on like the encrypted file system, and like I can see anything, and I can actually debug what's going on. But that was a process that took me 2 weeks just to understand what's going on and how I can hijack some of the parts. And exactly, like it's really hard to make those things foolproof without like proper code signing,
without actual hardware roots of trust and actually tethering and
and again, you have to do this thing on something as small as this, isn't But that is, let's see if I can show you. That's
pretty good.
There,
to be clear, he doesn't make bombs for a living.
Yeah, no, I have
desk of a reverse engineer.
So anymore.
Those probes that you can see here, they're basically just holding the wires to the board, and that thing, and there's a USB hub on that desk that has all of my all of my hardware hacking tools connected to it. So, like one example is this board, the JTagulator, which is really useful to find JTAG boards or UART headers on the board. So if you don't know, so let's say you have a bunch of touch points on the board and you don't know what they are, here you have 24 channels that you can just connect a bunch of wires, touch the touch points of the board, and this piece of hardware will actually try to enumerate and guess what is the right pin out and that's pretty cool. Where is the header that you're looking for. So all of those, I have a few of those gadgets. They're connected to a USB hub that runs all the way back to this desk where I have my computer and I'm, doing my work. So it's kind of hard to show that, but basically
there's some harmony there, man.
Yeah,
there is.
Yeah, but it's a lot of small tools and cutters and soldering irons.
So I have to ask though, how long have you been following that workflow, and how has it changed?
With regards to IoT. Or in general?
With regards to, shall we say, analysis.
I think
because it was different in software days. I remember you were self-denigrating about how you used to analyze malware, for instance. But yeah,
with malware, it's a bit different because you don't have the hardware component. But it's still a black box thing. You have to look at an executable, and if there's any obfuscation or encryption or whatever, you gotta let it load, dump the memory. It's almost a similar process, but in a different layer. There's much more physical stuff you have to do on IoT devices. Again, like open the enclosure and reveal the board, and then look at the board and understand where
all those elements
you can possibly find a UART header or a JTAG header or whatever.
Has anything pleasantly surprised you? Have you been opened it up and been like, what, and gone through this process and been like, man, these people did it well?
Yeah, with this box, there's a tamper-proof.
Tamper-proofing?
Yeah.
Nice.
Which I didn't in the code. I didn't find where it actually registers the fact that it was open. The switch is there. I haven't found yet what it's actually doing, but it's there. But with the encryption and with all of the stuff that they did, it's actually a well-made device. What I'm working on now, by the way, the attack that I'm working on this device is something that I call the evil plumber attack. So it's almost
is that a Mario reference?
Yeah. So I think that attacking this device remotely is difficult. So what I'm resorting to is there is a mode that if you have physical access to the device and you hit there's 2 buttons on the device. If you press one of them for 3 seconds, it'll go into the state where, because you can connect it to your network either via an Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi. But in order to connect it to the Wi-Fi, you have to hold a button there for 3 seconds. It'll go into Wi-Fi pairing mode. It'll open a hotspot on the device. You will then connect to that hotspot.
Wow.
It'll open a web page, and through that web page, you configure the Wi-Fi. So right now, what I see is that I think that there's a few vulnerabilities in that web application that you use to configure the device. So hopefully, if my research and exploits will work, it'll be an attack where, let's say you have one of those in your apartment and you, I don't know, call a plumber or an electrician. That guy will see
Wario.
Huh?
Mario's evil twin, Wario.
Yeah. And Wario will see the hub. He'll hold it for 3 seconds, connect to it from his phone, exploit it. The end result would be like they'll steal your keys, right? Or
they can open it for their compatriots who are going to come by when you're not there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm working on right now. So it's you have
and in an apartment complex.
Yeah.
If a guy with the right look shows up to your door and says, "I came from maintenance," that's a completely realistic scenario.
Yeah. So
or the actual guy from maintenance was given $100 to do it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm working on, and it's a I won't show you, but it's like a real company. That's their logo. I'm gonna hide it, but it's a company, and they make solutions for like rental apartments.
It sounds like if they put the effort into doing this well and even doing tamper proofing, that they probably will respond well to whatever you find.
Yeah, they have a vulnerability disclosure program, and I'm very hopeful that I'll be able to exploit it. It's kind of annoying because there's a bunch of like their web server runs on Java. What the hell? Hoorah.
Java people love Java.
I mean, when do you consider yourself done on a project like this? Is it when you found the first thing, or is it when you find the most serious thing, or is it you've got a full understanding?
When I get a root shell, honestly, when I get a root shell on the device,
after that's just
I have a root shell on the device now, but you have to take the device apart. You have to do a lot of things. But once I'll be in a situation where I can hold the button for 3 seconds and then get a shell, I'm done. I'm like done. Writing the email, done. And you also find a lot of interesting things when you do that. Like a lot of stuff on that device goes to China. So like it's again like a lot of those
unsurprising.
Yeah, a lot of those devices are like made by one Chinese company somewhere in China, and they go
China, you say,
and I believe it's pronounced China.
Yeah,
and they
never heard of them.
Yeah, and they just white label it to other vendors. And I mean, Sam, I don't know if you remember, but back at Cybereason 2017, Yoav and I found like a very similar exploit that left like 1 million security cameras vulnerable.
Oh yeah,
and there was actually a botnet that made out of it. It was called the Perserai botnet, which was actually created by our exploits.
Well, I'm gonna bring us to an end pretty soon here.
On that note,
what? Yeah, it is.
I do remember that. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was gonna say on that note, Amit, what else did we not cover personally? Like, is there anything else that the world should know about Amit Serper that you typically don't
or something you're
about?
excited about,
or something? I want everyone to know that my name is pronounced Amit.
Amit.
Yeah.
Amit.
And no, listen, I
think I pronounce it right, don't I?
I don't.
Yeah.
Do I not?
Jake, you do.
Amit?
Yeah. You're okay, Sam.
Okay. Because I would really be embarrassed for at least.
No, I'm used to it. There's 2 things I'm used to it. I'm used to people like butchering my name and people saying, and I get this like twice a week, every week since I moved here. Wow, you're not Indian. Like I get that every week.
Yeah, yeah, and the last name is correctly pronounced Serper.
I actually learned because it's a Turkish last name, so I learned.
Oh, is it wrong? Am I wrong?
Very recently, like a few months ago, I learned that it's actually pronounced. In the Turkish pronunciation, it's Serpesh.
Serpesh?
Yeah.
So how would you pronounce?
I just say
100% correctly your name.
Amit Serpesh.
Well, in like the proper pronunciation in Hebrew for me would be Selpel.
Yeah, Selpel.
But Serper is how I everyone here in the U.S. and that's my name now, I guess. But no, I love what I do. I take pride in what I do. I think that the more the world moves forward with how connected everything is, and it doesn't. And when I say connected things, it doesn't mean that your light switch is connected. I'm talking about how we as people are connected. If it's like how political outrage is being expressed on social media and people are being pushed to do all sorts of weird and crazy things. If it's how, our cars have APIs where you can send a packet and affect someone's car, and
eventually personal APIs. In one of our previous podcasts, we talked to Daniel Miesler about assistants and personal APIs and how they'll interface with each other. So these things are converging.
Yeah, Amazon had a company. I don't know if they still have them. They called Mechanical Turk, and it's basically a bunch of people doing manual tasks with an API. And their slogan was Mechanical Turk, artificial intelligence. That was their slogan back then.
Although AIs are now using Mechanical Turks to pass things like the robot checks.
There you go. So
yeah.
So we are all connected, and I think that it's very. People assume that everything is fine. People assume that if they get a smart plug or a smart something, or I don't know, they drive their Tesla, which has an API, and all of those, they assume that it's fine. They assume that someone is actually, someone is doing their job, and things are secure. And no, things are really bad.
This is just the wiring for our future robot overlords, by the way. This is all setting up.
So I think that, we need to remember that whoever is writing the code that runs on the things that we depend on is a human being. And human beings are really bad at programming secure things. And again, the evidence to that is how even the most secure things are getting hacked. It's just a matter of time and resources. When I used to work at the government, we called it what is the threshold of effort? How much effort do you want to put into something? And effort means people and money. You put in enough people and money on a problem, you solve it. And it doesn't matter what problem it is. So,
well, the root of that, by the way, is a combination of, yes, human faults, but also the fact security is still prioritized relatively low, and we got to get products out, and that means we use off-the-shelf stuff, and we take shortcuts, or we're rushing to get things out because we're humanly faulty, right? Exactly. And our systems are, and our companies are.
And we try to come up, the industry, people,
collectively,
we try to come up with solutions, S-bombs and all of those things. But at the end of the day, great. So you know that your device or your project is running an ancient version of some library that just got popped.
S-bomb is just a list of things to exploit.
Yeah, what do you do now? Do you deploy a patch on 200,000 devices? What do you do? So we as an industry keep coming up with those buzzwords. Oh, S-bombs, great. Or whatever it is. And again, no offense to people who love S-bombs, but it's another buzzword that we all say, okay, that's
to compensate and control instead of fixing the root.
It's Band-Aids.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's why I love the approach of what we do at Stern, and one of the reasons I joined, because this is an actual solution to a big problem, and this solution works. Now, it's not like I'm trying to, push the product that we make, although I'm really proud of it. But the problem of security needs to be changed, and it can never be solved. It can only be made better in increments. But we gotta have a paradigm shift. We gotta understand that creating new buzzwords and new technologies that are doing the same things that we have been doing for years, just like, information security became cybersecurity, but it's the same thing. You just call it in a different.
It is the same thing.
Yeah.
But I've always said for years, so most of the dimensions of security are things that we didn't do right the first time, and they're just going to keep getting worse. Logging didn't do it right. SIM identity didn't do it right. IAM, it's file integrity didn't do it right. Anti-malware, etc. And if it's going to keep getting worse, and somebody is going to be care enough to pay for the solution, there's a market because there's people exploiting it.
It's hilarious how identity management, which is a things it's from my wife works at a company that does identity management.
We didn't do it right the first time, and we still don't.
Yeah, it's stuff that they've been trying to get right since the late 90s, and now it's a thing again.
Oh yeah, it's not going anywhere. I mean, yes, we will get improvements, but some of the big problems are still really on the authorization and the policy side.
Right.
It's got to scale in ways never foreseen.
Which is why we, as an industry, as people, we need to understand that whatever it is that we're doing is not working.
No.
And on that note,
on that lovely note, let's go do our jobs. Yeah.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was really, really fun.
It's always good to talk to you, man. And it's good to talk to you. So I'm in Mass, and Jacob, you're not far from us. We have to get together at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I'm flying out tonight, but I'll be back in 2 weeks, hopefully.
All right.
2 weeks.
We'll see you when you get back, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.